My story begins like most stories, in an ordinary family where everything seems so familiar, understandable, and safe. When I was little, I always believed that my family was an unshakable fortress. Everything was good. My mom and dad worked. My brother and I had everything we wanted and more. The house was big and cozy. My mother often cooked delicious meals, and my father always gave me wise advice. The everything looked like it should be in an ideal world where problems are only on the TV screen. I remember the moments when my parents and I ate our evening meal together, laughing, discussing the news, and planning weekend trips. This was my childhood, the feeling of security, love and family warmth that surrounded us. My parents never put much emphasis on money. They worked hard but always found time for us. My dad used to say that money is not the most important thing. The most important thing is mutual understanding in the family. And I believed him. I was a good student at school. My parents were always worried about my grades, not because they were afraid that I would not find my place in life, but because they wanted me to stay focused. Their goal was simple: we had to be successful and happy. And I also often heard my mom say that the most important thing is to be a good person and the rest will follow. However, what looked perfect at first glance was just a shell. I didn't notice what was happening behind that shell, and my eyes, which should have been directed at what was really important, were always diverted somewhere else. I'm not talking about how my parents made their financial statements or opened accounts. There was nothing like that, and I didn't realize the importance of this until everything changed. I remember overhearing several times conversations between my parents that became increasingly tense. It started after I came home from university. My parents seemed to become more and more withdrawn. My dad started spending more time at work, and for some reason my mom looked tired, even after we had dinner together. I couldn't understand what was happening, but I didn't ask anything. It seemed to me that it was just a period, and everything would be as it was before. But the more I watched, the more questions I had. I began to notice that my father, who had not been very interested in finance before, now often picked up bills and a laptop. My mom looked unhappy, but as always, she tried to give the impression that everything was under control. I began to suspect that something was wrong, but I didn't understand what it was. Later, strange calls came, unknown numbers, then letters that my parents quickly hid. One day when I returned home after lectures, I saw open documents on the table. That was the moment when I realized that everything was not as I thought. The documents contained figures, amounts, outstanding bills, huge numbers that I could not immediately comprehend. I asked my mom what it was, and her reaction was extremely strange. She tried to distract me by saying that it was just a small matter that they would work out among themselves. But I already knew that something big was wrong. That moment left a mark on my memory. It was the first time I realized that even a family can have dark sides, hidden behind huge walls of emotion and love. I did not know then that these moments were just the beginning of what was to come. After I saw those documents, I tried not to think about it. I had my own things to do: university, friends, the future. But this mystery began to haunt me. I began to notice more and more strange signs. My mom would suddenly become silent when we talked about money. Dad would not allow us to discuss it, and every time I tried to ask, he would immediately change the subject. After a while, my parents started to look like they were trying to avoid me again. It seemed to me that I was no longer part of the family, that my parents were becoming more and more withdrawn and distant. I thought these were just old problems that they had to deal with on their own. But I didn't know that these problems would lead to something much worse. And then, a few months later, when I returned home after the holidays, I had news. And this news changed everything. And I realized that the family idyll that seemed perfect was just a shell hiding a terrible truth. The next few days after I found out about the mysterious documents on the table were tense. I tried to collect my thoughts and understand what had really happened. What were these debts? How did it happen that my parents, seemingly well-adjusted and financially stable people, got into this situation? I tried to talk to my mother, but she became more and more alienated, avoided my eyes, and tried to divert the conversation to other topics. And every time I approached my father, he treated my requests even more coldly. I realized that they were hiding something, but I didn't know exactly what it was. The topic of money had always been something separate for our family, but now I could see how this issue was becoming the main one, like a dark shadow hanging over us. In the end, everything exploded. One evening, after I came home from university, I saw my parents sitting in the kitchen with some man in a suit. He looked like he didn't belong in our house. His expression was serious, and his hands were constantly playing with the handle of a black bag, as if he was waiting for some moment to act. My father was nervous. My mother was silent. Her eyes were empty, as if she had lost herself. When I entered the room, my parents instantly fell silent. As usual, my father tried to pretend that everything was under control, but I could see his nervousness. He quickly stood up, and probably to change the atmosphere, saying, "It's just a financial matter. Son, everything is fine." But something in his voice, in the way he didn't look me in the eye, made me doubt. I didn't ask him anything else, but the next day I decided to find out more. Why did my parents try so hard to avoid my questions? What were they hiding? Agur and I started looking for old documents from my mom and dad, as well as checking the bills they were trying to hide from me. And that's when I came across the first significant clues. At first, I couldn't believe it. The debts that they were trying so hard not to draw my attention to were astronomical. It turned out that they were in arrears on several loans, outstanding loans, and even money chains that had simply swallowed them up. In addition, one of the documents indicated a large amount of money had spent on unnecessary purchases related to health and business that never worked out. All this was so frightening for me that I began to feel the ground under my feet moving away from me. All my ideas about family and its stability simply crumbled. How could my parents let this happen? I grew up believing that my parents were the people I could turn to for help, the ones I could rely on in any situation. And then there was this invisible but huge crack in their financial foundation. And they were hiding it from me. And I didn't realize what it meant to me yet. At the time, I just thought I needed to help. But as I learned more, the situation became even more complicated. My parents didn't just spend more than they could afford. They had hidden the true extent of the debt from me, and it wasn't just about the money, but also about the trust they had lost in my eyes. A week passed after I first faced the reality of my parents' debt. I couldn't understand why they had kept silent for so long, why they hadn't shared it with me earlier. What were they trying to hide? My mind was constantly running with questions that I couldn't find answers to. I felt that my parents, although they loved me very much, had lost control of the situation and were now trying to keep their dignity with their last breath. I had to talk to them. It was inevitable. And even though I was afraid, I couldn't leave it to chance. There were many scenarios in my head about how it could end, but I was prepared for any outcome. The real problem was that every decision could have serious consequences, both for me and for my parents. One evening when I got home, my parents were already in the kitchen. The AO on their faces, I could see expressions of fatigue and stress, as well as a sense of great guilt. My mother was sitting at the table, and my father was standing by the window, looking like he was trying to run away from himself. I went to the table and sat down. At first we were silent. Everyone realized that this pause meant more than 1,000 words. "You have the right to know," he said, his voice sounding very low, as if he was weighting every word. We couldn't tell you everything because we were afraid of losing you. We were afraid you wouldn't understand, and we didn't want it to be a burden for you." I looked at him and didn't know what to say. A feeling of disappointment washed over me. How could they choose between me and their dignity? Even now I realized that this secret, this debt, was their responsibility. They had to take on all the consequences, even if it was difficult. But my mother, who had been sitting in silence, finally looked up. "We couldn't take it back," she added. "The situation was much more complicated than you think. We didn't know where to go. And even when we tried to look for a way out, the debt just kept growing." Dad put his arm around her shoulders, and together they looked like two people who, despite everything, still remained each other's support. But that didn't change the fact that I was sitting in front of them and had lost my sense of security. I felt like my whole childhood was coming apart at the seams. I looked at their faces, which now seemed alien to me, and answered, "But why didn't you tell me earlier? I could have helped. I could have found options. It's not just money, it's a matter of trust. This is our family, and I don't understand why you didn't do this before. We were afraid that you, like so many others, would think we couldn't take care of ourselves," he said quietly. "And we didn't want you to feel obligated to help. But it doesn't matter now. It is important that you understand that we were ready to pay for our mistakes. They were ours." They were silent, and I didn't know what to say next either. All these words did not give me relief. They could not turn back the clock. I sat there, running it all through my head, and all I felt was disappointment. They hadn't just lost their money, they had lost their honor, and I felt like I had lost something important too. The next week I spent almost every day at work, but the thought of my father's debt never left my mind. No matter how hard I tried to focus, every time I stopped, something in me came back to that story, to everything I had learned. And the more I thought about the situation, the more I felt that some part of this truth remained hidden. One morning, as I sat down for coffee, a new email suddenly appeared in front of me from one of my father's business partners, who I hadn't paid attention to before. It seemed to be very important, but I had never had a chance to read it. It was a report, and as it turned out later, it was this document that opened up new horizons of what I really didn't know about my parental situation. This letter was like a key to a great secret that my parents were trying so hard to hide. And even if I never asked them to tell me everything, even if I couldn't understand all the technicalities of this business, there was something I couldn't ignore. I slowly unfolded the document. What I saw made my heart skip a few beats. What did I see in this report? Could I immediately guess where it was going? I read every word again, numbers, names, dates. It was a fairly large business project, and I knew nothing about it before. Everything looked like it was under control, at least that's what my parents said. But then why did the numbers look so strange? Why such large amounts and so few assets? My mind started working at full speed. Immediately, without wasting any time, I decided to contact a financial advisor I knew who could help me make sense of these documents. I knew it was my last chance to find out the truth. I could have left everything as it was and lived my life. But something pushed me to find out more. Perhaps I even hoped that the letter was a mistake, no matter how absurd. A few hours later, I was sitting in the office of a consultant who was carefully studying all the documents. His expression changed when he saw the total amount of the debt. He looked at the numbers in silent amazement, and then slowly looked at me. "It's complicated," he said, barely moving his lips. "Your parents don't just have debt. They took out loans from several different banks and borrowed money from several large investors. And even if they tried to pay off those debts, their ability to repay it all was in question." I could feel my heart start to beat faster. It seems that what I knew was not even the beginning of what was really going on behind the scenes. All these years my parents had just been hiding it, hoping it would go away. And I, like a fool, thought that I could just take care of the problem. And now that it's become so huge, I didn't know what to do with it. The consultant continued, "It's not just a debt. It's like a shadow that can consume everything they have. If these investors realize that things are getting out of hand, they can make it very painful for your family. And, frankly, it sounds like your parents didn't have a plan to deal with it." I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. At that moment, I realized that this was not just a debt, it was a catastrophe that was developing in real time. It is impossible to say exactly when the betrayal began. Sometimes it seems that it has always been there, like a shadow that was just waiting for the moment when it could come to the surface. Perhaps it happened back when I first began to suspect that things were not as smooth as I thought they were with my parents. Or maybe it was the night I saw everything I knew fall apart right before my eyes. And I was sitting in my office, and there was a report in front of me. It was not just a document. It was my key to understanding what was happening in my family. I was tiredly running my finger over the numbers when suddenly a single letter caught my eye. It was dated a few years earlier and bore my father's signature, but there was something strange about it. I was convinced that it was not an ordinary business document. It was more like a personal message that they were trying to hide. The letter contained a few short phrases that were written in small and almost unreadable handwriting. But what I read literally pierced me through. My father wrote that for several years they had been conducting secret deals with people who had no intention of doing honest business. It was about large sums of money and violations of laws that they tried to hide from me. Why did my father do it? Was he forced to? And what was I supposed to do with this truth? I was overwhelmed with pain. It was not just a betrayal of my parents, it was a betrayal of my trust in them. They were my heroes, the people I could always trust. How could this happen? I was overwhelmed with emotions, and I felt betrayed not only by my parents but also by myself. How could I not notice it? How could I not see the signs that indicated there could be deception behind their success? I could not leave it for later. I had to talk to them. I was convinced that they would explain it. And even if they were lying, I had to hear it from them. An in-depth lie is something I could not tolerate. I went to see them the next day, my heart beating so fast that I almost fainted from the tension. What would they tell me? Am I ready for anything? Am I ready to learn the truth? When I arrived at their house, my mom and dad were sitting in the living room as usual. They looked as they always did, calm, smiling, and I stood in front of them with a bitter feeling that I had not only been deceived, but also faced a choice I had not expected. I started with simple words. I found the letter. I know that you have been hiding something important from me. What happened to our family? Why did you never tell me about the debt? And who are these people with whom you made these deals? They looked at me but didn't answer right away, and I saw my father cross his arms nervously, and my mother began to smile nervously as usual. "My son," my father said, "you don't understand anything. It's not what you think. We did everything we could to protect you from this world." But his words did not bring me comfort. With every passing moment, I felt something in my heart tearing. I was looking for answers, but every word they said was just a new imprint of the wall they had built around me. Ah! Don't tell me it was for my sake. I couldn't contain the anger that burst out. How could you? How could you hide it? You destroyed my future, my memories of you. And then it became clear my parents were no longer the people I knew. I felt that this was more than just a debt. It was a great betrayal, and now I was on the verge of not knowing how to cope with what was happening. Meanwhile, when I left my parents' house, every step seemed difficult. Not only physically, but also emotionally. I didn't know what to do with all this, with all those feelings that were tearing me up inside. How can you leave everything that was sacred to you? How can you let go of people who tried to make you stronger but ended up breaking you? For the first few days, I couldn't find a place for myself. I just walked around my apartment like a ghost. One question kept running through my mind: why did they do this? Why couldn't they tell me the truth? I began to realize that I would not be able to put an end to all this until I got an honest answer. I was tormented by the thought that I would never know the whole truth. The situation seemed to be over. I received a confession from my parents, and my doubts disappeared, but in reality it was just the beginning of new questions. The debt, as I found out, was just the tip of the iceberg. Underneath it was a whole system that had begun to destroy our family a long time ago. And I had to understand it all on my own, without their help. I decided to talk to a specialist, a psychologist. This was the first step I was ready to take. I could no longer be alone with my thoughts because they began to consume me. Sitting in the psychologist's office, I heard his first words. "Listen, you've already started to take a big step forward by realizing that the problem is not only the debt, but also your relationship. The fact that they kept you in the dark is causing you stress and frustration, but you also have to deal with your feelings towards them." I felt a wave of emotions wash over me, and I remembered how much I loved my parents. They were my idols, my supports. But could I forgive them for destroying my memories and my vision of myself? The psychologist continued to speak, and I tried to feel every word, but it seemed to be becoming heavy and left no room for rest. Could it be that I was part of this problem myself? Could I, because of my ignorance, have given my parents the opportunity to hide the truth from me? If I forgive them, will I ever be able to build a new relationship with them? And can I rebuild what was destroyed? Those few weeks I spent in self-reflection were an important lesson for me. I began to realize that these feelings, pain, disappointment, anger, were not only the consequences of what my parents had done, but also my own. I was not ready to look at the situation from the other side. I was holding on to the idea that they had ruined my future, but in reality, my future is only starting now. I decided to go to my parents and try to talk to them again. This time I was not angry. I wanted to understand them. I wanted to understand why they couldn't tell me the truth from the beginning. They were at home when I arrived. I wasn't as nervous as I had been the first time. I saw a sadness in my father's eyes that I hadn't wanted to notice before, though I sat down at the table and looked at them. "I want to understand," I said. "Why didn't you tell me about all these debts? Why did you hide the truth from me?" My mother sighed heavily, and my father looked at me with an expression as if it was difficult to put all the words together. "We didn't want you to worry," my father finally said. You were still young, and we didn't want you to get into this world of debt and problems. We tried to solve everything without you because we thought you could live without it." But I heard something in his words that was no longer an excuse. It was just a desire to protect me from reality, from what they could not control. My parents were hostages to their mistakes, and now I was somehow connected to those mistakes as well. After I learned the truth about my parents' debts, life began to look completely different. I couldn't stop thinking about how I was trapped. Not only did I lose the inheritance I was promised, but I was also forced to live with this shadow of debt that I couldn't shake. It was like an oppressive burden that constantly weighed on my life, not allowing me to relax for a moment. For several months, I tried to resolve the situation without success. My parents refused to take full responsibility. They said they had done everything they could to avoid bankruptcy, but the debts were so large that even their experience did not help. It was a hopeless maze with no way out. I lost faith in the system. All this financial advice, the counseling I was getting, didn't give me answers to the questions I was asking myself every day. How could I get out of this hopeless situation? Was there any way out at all? I was trapped in a financial trap, and I didn't even know where to start. One day, after another meeting with a counselor, I decided to turn to a former friend, Michael. We were good friends at university, but after graduation, our paths parted. Michael was always a risk taker, but he also had a great talent in the world of finance. Maybe he could help me find some way out. When I dialed his number, it turned out that he was in town. We arranged to meet in a cafe, and I went there, hoping that at least one person could help me. Michael was the same charismatic guy I remembered. He was sitting at a table with a cup of coffee and smiling slightly, as if there were no problems in the world. "Well, you look a little upset," Michael said when I sat down next to him. I put the papers with the results of the counseling sessions and the list of debts in front of him. "Here, I've looked into everything I can, but I don't see any way out. My parents can't help me. I'm tangled up in these debts myself. Everything around me is falling apart, and I can't change anything," I said, feeling the words release the pent-up pain. Michael looked at the papers carefully, sighed, and put them on the table. Sometimes people get into financial traps when they don't have a plan to get out of it. These are not your debts, they are your parents. But you're going to bear them now, because the only thing left is to find a way out of this story." I felt the pressure on my chest grow even heavier. But at the same time, something inside me calmed down a bit. Michael was one of those people who could get you in the right frame of mind, even when the situation was hopeless. You know how you and I worked together at the university when we had no money and nothing to live on. Michael continued, "It's only a matter of time. Maybe you can fix all this if you find the right approach." I listened to him carefully, although the thought of my debts was on my mind. "But it's not easy. It requires more than just the right approach. It's a question of how I'm going to live my life, how I'm going to pay off these debts. I don't want to lose everything I have." Michael looked at me with a serious expression on his face. "You can win this if you focus on what you have, not what you've lost. Yes, the debts are heavy, but you can get your finances back on track if you act with prudence and a plan. You are not lost yet, believe me." These words became a kind of light for me. They gave me hope, even though I wasn't sure how I could get through it all. But something inside me changed. I was not ready to give up. I was not going to let these debts and my parents' mistakes ruin my life.